Thank you, Hiran, for that introduction. The principal of the Ananda College, Mr. S.M. Kirtiratna, the deputy principal and members of the tutorial staff, the president, Mr. Dushmanta Karannagoda, and the members of the management committee and executive committee, Mr. Samitha Seneviratna, who was involved in organizing Olcott oration, all Anandians, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And for those who are connected to us online from all over the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is indeed an honor to deliver the prestigious Olcott oration for the year 2020. In fact, a few months ago, when Mr. President and Mr. Samitha came to my office to announce this in light event, I would say I was thrilled. I know the value of this invitation. It's a lifetime achievement for somebody to do this oration. So therefore, I thank the president and the executive committee, management committee of the OBA for inviting me to deliver the oration tonight. It must have been quite challenging to organize an event of this scale under the new normalcy. Of course, I had my part to play in bringing about this new normalcy during my tenure as the Director General of Health Services. The Olcott oration is being live streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and Ananda College OBA as well. Let me begin by saying a few words about this great personality after whom this oration has been named. It is customary in orations to say some words about the personality. A visionary leader, trendsetter, and trailblazer, Colonel Henry Steele Olcott changed the destiny of an small nation. He laid the foundation for a pioneering school in the country, and we commemorate him with much adoration today. His unusual and illustrious life and groundbreaking achievements are unchallenged and unparalleled even in today's context. Exactly how a talented and accomplished Westerner from New Jersey, USA, ended up as the renowned and celebrated white Buddhist of Ceylon is a remarkable story worth recounting today, tomorrow, forever. Hence, I wish to take a few minutes, as is customary, to take you through the life story of a jewel of a human being before I embark on my presentation. Born in Orange, New Jersey, USA in 1832, Henry's father was a businessman and the Olcotts were devout Presbyterians. An unusually skilled agriculturalist, Henry Olcott became the agriculture correspondent of the New York Tribune in 1858. At the beginning of the American Civil War, he enlisted and was later promoted to the rank of colonel. Later, he was appointed to the Special Commission that investigated President Abraham Lincoln's assassination in 1865. He left the military in 1865 and returned to New York to study law. He was admitted to the bar in 1868 and enjoyed a successful practice specialized in insurance, revenue, and custom law. To that point in his life, Henry Steele Olcott was the very model of what a proper Victorian era American gentleman was supposed to be. But that was about to change. With his gradually increasing interest in metaphysics and supernaturalism, getting together with Madame Helena Blavatsky, he founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. Meanwhile, in Ceylon, there was trouble brewing. In the oppressive climate that existed following centuries of subjugation, most Ceylonese had lost their self-esteem. The Buddhists were still long way behind in terms of modern education. In this backdrop, the Panadura Vade, led by several prominent priests with Venerable Migettuvatte Gunananda and Venerable Hikkaduwe Sri Sumangala Thero in the lead, acted as a catalyst for a chain of events that followed. The final debate was reported in some detail in the Ceylon Times, and Colonel Olcott, while living in USA, came to know about the same and immediately started corresponding with the prominent Buddhist priests in an attempt to learn more about Buddhism and the predicament of Buddhists in the country. Convinced that he could bring about a difference, Colonel Olcott arrived in Ceylon in 1880. Thus began the great Buddhist revival of Ceylon. He was committed, result-oriented, driven with passion, which was unique and had commendable organizational skills. He started working very closely with Reverend Hikkaduwe Sri Sumangala Thero. He embarked on a very difficult tour by bullock cart on primitive roads that lasted well over months, accompanied only by an interpreter. He wanted to raise funds for Buddhist education and wanted to take the true message of Buddhism to the people. Eventually, he wrote the book Buddhist Catechism, which was published in 1881, went through more than 40 editions, and got translated to over 40 languages. Colonel Olcott designed the Buddhist flag consisting of 6 colors, which is embraced by Buddhists world over. He also represented the Buddhist cause to British government and fought to find redress for restrictions imposed against Buddhism. He was also instrumental in getting Vesak declared as a public holiday. Improving Buddhist education was a top priority in Colonel Olcott's agenda. The Buddhist Theosophical Society was formed in June 1880 to drive this course. The Buddhist English School was established with 37 students and 3 teachers on 1st of November 1886, which is the official birthday of Ananda College. The name of the school was given when it moved to its present location in 1895. The founding of Ananda College was the high point of the revival, which stretched through 19th and 20th centuries. Urging educational advancement upon Ceylon Buddhists, he succeeded in establishing 3 colleges and 250 schools, a Herculean task made possible largely due to his untiring efforts and single-minded dedication to the cause. A splendid monument of noble work is what he left behind when he passed away on 17th February 1907. On a personal note, by now you would have heard of my life journey in some detail as read out by my friend Professor Hiran Amarsekar. As I matured as a person, as I came up in my chosen profession, as I walked through different phases in my life, many things have changed, but what has remained in the same is my heartfelt appreciation of the enriching time I spent at Ananda College. I am at a loss to express the gratitude I feel towards this great institution. My beloved school, my alma mater, Ananda College, I pay tribute to you. That being said, let's move on to my presentation titled Sri Lanka's Response to Global Pandemic COVID-19, a strategic perspective. I wish to share my experience as then Director General of Health Services of Sri Lanka in our fight against this global pandemic, and I have restricted my insights, opinions, and views to the time I performed as the Director General of Health Services, namely from January 2020 to mid-August 2020. This was the period during which Sri Lanka faced the initial outbreak of COVID-19, managed to successfully control the spread of it, and the country returned to a new normalcy, preserving the safety and well-being of the nation. Let me take you through different phases, the strategies formulated, the mechanisms put in place, and the actions initiated by us as a country. I will commence with incident in Wuhan in China, which is where the story begins. China, for the first time, reported coronavirus epidemic in Wuhan to the World Health Organization on 31st December 2019. This disease has been in existence in China at least from November and has been recognized as an atypical pneumonia. The market in which in Wuhan city was closed on 1st of January 2020, where the patients were believed to have originated from. After 23 days, on 23rd of January 2020, the Wuhan city was locked down. As there was a lag period to lock down the city, the disease was spread to other areas, and China had to take tremendous efforts to curb the control of the disease. First novel coronavirus patient outside China was reported in Thailand on 13th January 2020. Today, Thailand is considered as one of the leading countries which control COVID-19 successfully. This success has been attributed to the early and steady steps taken by the government of Thailand. For example, just 3 days after Wuhan reporting the outbreak, Thailand set up thermal scanning in airports. Contact tracing was given priority over difficult mass screening. In Thailand, the number of reported cases was low. Some were skeptical if the low numbers of reported cases was due to insufficient testing. However, since there hasn't been any sharp rise in unexplained deaths, the official report appeared to be correct. We witnessed COVID-19 rapidly spreading across the world. By 14 November 2020, the disease has already spread to 225 countries in the world. North and South America has been worst affected. The Asian region was not very far behind. The first COVID-19 patient in Sri Lanka was diagnosed on 28th of January 2020, who was a Chinese tourist. And then the first Sri Lankan COVID-19 patient was diagnosed on 11th March 2020. A technical committee chaired by the Director General of Health Services was established as early as 14th January 2020. Lengthy discussions took place at the technical committee to identify the ways and means for Sri Lanka during the anticipated crisis. We analyzed the global as well as regional COVID-19 situation with a special emphasis on China, Italy, South Korea, in order to identify the best strategies available. As early as 15th of March, we proposed the following strategies to control COVID-19 in Sri Lanka to His Excellency, the President, through the Honorable Minister of Health. That was on 15th March. 1. Emergency mechanism to restrict the movement of public even to the extent of locking down. 2. Advise people to stay home as much as possible. 3. Non-essential workforce to stay home without reporting to work. 4. Establish mechanisms to maintain essential services. 5. Air restrictions from high-risk countries. These strategies were well received by His Excellency the President. Early actions were implemented based on those strategies. Our two guiding principles were, at the outset, the prevention of infection, coronavirus infection coming into the country, and later the prevention of spreading the infection in the country. Though at one point we failed to stop the virus coming into Sri Lanka, I believe by adopting that strategy principle, we were able to buy time to increase our readiness for the disease. On 25th of January 2020, the Health Steering Committee chaired by the Honorable Minister of Health was established. On the same day, thermal screening was activated at the ports of entry, and the PCR facilities were established at Medical Research Institute. It should be noted that Sri Lanka was one of the first countries in Southeast Asia to develop the capacity to diagnose COVID-19. On 29th of January, issuing online visa by Sri Lanka was suspended. By 30th January, on the quarantine front, the first quarantine center was established at the army camp at Diyatalab. I believe that it would be clear to you by now that by the time the WHO declared COVID-19 as a public health emergency of international concern, or they call it FIC, Sri Lanka has already taken many steps to combat the spread of disease. On 2nd February, health declaration form for inbound passengers was introduced at Bandar Naik International Airport, initially for returnees from China and then expanded to all countries. On the curative front, by 10th of January, 12 hospitals were identified as isolation facilities to treat COVID suspect patients, and then the number was increased throughout. In addition to the National Infectious Disease Hospital at Angoda, we transformed certain hospitals as COVID treatment facilities, starting from Valikanda and Iranavilla. These hospitals were located in strategic locations. From 24th February, we started following up on persons returning from overseas for 14 days by public health inspectors at their residences. On 18th March, the Director General of Health Services delegated powers vested upon him by the Quarantine and Disease Prevention Ordinance to the Inspector General of Police for the COVID-19 control activities. On the same day, the entire country was declared a disease locality. On 20th March, COVID-19 was declared a quarantinable disease. Another gazette was released on 11th April pertaining to the disposition of confirmed and suspect COVID-19 deceased. This ordinance, which was enacted in 1897, proved to be still viable. With timely implemented public health activities, the country was able to successfully control COVID-19 clusters, which emerged from time to time, such as the Italy returnees cluster, Suduvella cluster, Keselwatta cluster, Navy cluster, repatriates cluster, and Kandakadu cluster. Those are shown in this slide. By 17th August 2020, the cumulative number of COVID-19 patients in Sri Lanka stood at 2,895 cases, of which 2,765 were already recovered. This resulted in rock bottom 130 active cases with a recovery rate of 95.5%, which was a remarkable achievement for any country. Up to this date, only 11 deaths were reported, giving a case fatality rate of 0.38%, which again was one of the lowest in the world. Out of the patients, there were 1,045 primary cases and 1,716 secondary cases. The secondary cases get the disease from primary cases, as one primary case would infect more than one patient. So the number of secondary cases would be certainly more than number of primary cases. So there were 1,045 primary cases and 1,716 secondary cases. Then see what happens. The fact that only 233 tertiary cases resulted from 1,716 secondary cases speaks volumes about the COVID control in Sri Lanka. So from 1,045, it goes up to 1,716, and it dramatically comes down to 233. That is only because of the control that we waged. Otherwise, it should be more and more. That is what happened in other countries. In this graph, the orange line indicates the cumulative cases over time. The blue line indicates cumulative number of recovered cases over time. The gap between the orange and blue line at a given time, at any given time, indicates the number of active cases for that day. You could see that the gap expanding and narrowing at various points. When this gap narrows, that means the active cases are going down, which is a very good situation. The narrowest point, you could see the narrowest point, the narrowest point shows the situation just before the onset of Kandakadu cluster. With the control of Kandakadu cluster, you could see that the gap once again narrows. That is where we ended up. That was in mid-August. This next slide, this composite bar chart, comparing 10 countries. These are not small countries, I mean, these are prominent countries. 10 countries shows the number of days taken for every 500 cases to double. So you can, in this graph, you can see that Sri Lanka has taken more days to double its every 500, which is a very good situation. This graph is a testimony to the fact that Sri Lanka was far more successful in COVID-19 control with respect to the 9 countries in comparison here. When reflecting back on COVID 19 control activities in Sri Lanka, some cardinal attributes of the success could be identified as follows. The main attribute was the historically strong, time tested public health system. Strong systems need strong leadership. Therefore, the able political leadership provided by His Excellency the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the government was a key contributing factor for this success. Kind of apolitical approach to the problem, quick appraisal of the nature of the problem, and decisiveness were cardinal features of His Excellency. On the other hand, Honorable Minister of Health facilitated the entire process. The principles of epidemiology were put into practice early and decisively through implementing evidence-based disease control strategies. For instance, promoting physical distancing, admission of all positive patients to a health facility, intensive contact tracing, stringent quarantine mechanism, targeted PCR testing, and effective use of quarantine and disease prevention ordinance were among such evidence-based strategies. Out of these, the decision that we took to admit every single positive patient to a facility was of paramount importance. If we allowed the positive patients to be at home, the disease would have spread. So that was a very important decision that we took. The strategy of PCR testing in Sri Lanka was different from that of a country where social transmission is going on. When South Korea went rampant on PCR testing, there were voices stating that in Sri Lanka, testing was insufficient. There were two reasons why South Korea had to depend heavily on PCR testing. One is social transmission of the disease, and the other was absence of a public health system in that country. In contrary, Sri Lanka was at the level of cluster transmission, and we have a well-knitted public health system, as I mentioned before. Also, as mentioned earlier, therefore, the targeted PCR testing was the key for Sri Lanka. However, we realized that we had to increase the PCR capability in Sri Lanka, which we were doing throughout. The core strengths of organizations were called into action through a whole of government and whole of society approach. The role played by Sri Lankan Army in quarantine and the role played by State Intelligence Service in contact tracing was unparalleled, and without their services, the mission would have been quite difficult. The WHO, the development partners, private sector, and civil society actively contributed to address the challenges effectively and efficiently during the outbreak. The technical inputs of experts were given serious weight and consideration when making public health decisions. Healthcare workers rising to the occasion with compassion and care made the fight against COVID-19 vibrant. Effective management of media through a comprehensive risk communication strategy worked out well for us. At initial stages, we witnessed social media creating some negative impact. We quickly recognized, and our tactic of providing one lead news every day to media worked very well. So when you get a top lead, every media will work around that top lead. So we provided the lead for the day. Then, with time, the mainstream media as well as social media both contributed positively to the cause. During lockdown, the government developed mechanisms to distribute essential goods and maintain essential services. The task force headed by Mr. Basil Rajapaksa spearheaded this process. In taking decisions vital to people, he did not leave health authorities. In fact, I participated very frequently at his meetings. If you remember, the home delivery of pharmaceuticals to the patients by hitherto non-operational postal services due to COVID was an innovative solution of tremendous worth. And there were many such innovative solutions made to address complex problems. Sri Lanka is a country with a significant proportion of overseas workers. Owing to the global COVID situation, the government took right measures to repatriate them in a systematic manner, creating a safe corridor so that the virus did not spread from them. As you know, there were voices that getting them down would have problems, but you could see that we created kind of a safe corridor so that the disease doesn't spread from them. Still, during lockdown period, Sri Lanka introduced workplace guidelines on prevention of COVID-19 in workplaces to sustain the economy and well-being of people. That was somewhat earlier, because the sustaining economy, sustaining livelihood is very important. So therefore, these guidelines were produced very early. With the country situation improving, Sri Lanka started introducing exit criteria. The concept of new normalcy was introduced to the society in the month of June to embrace the new safety culture with life moving on. Sri Lanka has gone down in the history as one of the few countries which held a national election successfully under strict COVID guidelines. In the month of June, health guidelines for conducting the elections amidst COVID outbreak were released by the Ministry of Health and Indigenous Medical Services in collaboration with Elections Commission of Sri Lanka. The parliamentary election was held on 5th August 2020 with all Sri Lankans setting an example of adherence to health guidelines. As you know, the election day is the day where you get the highest number of people on the street in this country. But as you know, there wasn't any transmission due to this massive election. That was simply because the way that we handled election. With all this emphasis on the new normalcy, which requires committed discipline from authorities and public alike, we witness certain lapses and excesses in the society. The country at times seemed to have taken for granted the limited freedom that was on offer, because the freedom that we offered was for livelihood, for economic resurrection, but then sometimes we saw that it was taken for granted. Certain events and breaches of new normalcy further paved the way for the disaster waiting to happen, which was rather unfortunate. In this context, a 2-month period of virus-free status, the country was virus-free other than the repatriates, for 2 months, ended in a sudden eruption of an unprecedented Minuangoda cluster followed by the fish market cluster. In conclusion, however, I remain positive that our country leadership, healthcare system, and all other stakeholders backed by the public will once again be able to rise victorious over the second outbreak. Thank you very much.